session. So I'm going to kick that off. So if you do have questions along the way, this is meant to be an open, engaging conversation. I'll have the chat box open. So if you want to type your questions along the way, happy to do so. There'll also be time for Q&A. But if things come up along the way, feel free to speak up and ask for clarification or dive into it a little bit. We're all here to learn. So excited to have you all here. Typically, one of our biggest things is house rules. This is a safe space. So we ask that you not contact users outside of here to sell anything or share any use cases or information that's shared within this group. This gives us all the opportunity to speak freely and ask questions and discuss our different use cases and challenges. So we appreciate your cooperation there. Some of you, I believe, joined via direct link. Some were connected through the Bevy platform. But to stay in touch as to what we've got coming up on the agenda, you can sign up to follow the Dynamics users group on the mugs.marketo.com page. You can sign up using an Adobe account login if you have that. They recently moved to a single sign-on option for that. But that will give you the opportunity to follow the Dynamics users group, and you'll be able to get emails when we send out things like the recordings. Such as today, and know exactly when our upcoming sessions are. So be sure to check that out. You can also attend any users groups from all around the world. So if you ever find a category of interest, you're certainly welcome to register, join, and follow along. Now, as far as some things that are upcoming, if you are doing your Marketo certification, a new certification exam was launched roughly, 1 or 2 months ago now, which is in the system, it's AD0E554. That is the newest exam that was put together by a group of Marketo champions, power users, and consultants that really tried to do a great job in making this a much more thorough and better exam experience than in the past. So if you are looking to take that, excited to have you do so. And if you have any feedback, you can also pass that along to me. We've got a direct line over to the education team and the team that helped build this. So any feedback that you have helps us to make a better exam for next time. As far as the upcoming mugs, as I mentioned, the great thing is the opportunity to be able to connect with groups that are all around the globe. We've got a couple of problem solving and office hours opportunities coming up. So if you've been having some challenges and issues, those are some great areas to be able to tap into some fellow Marketo users and get some insights, or just somebody to help work through your problems, especially if you don't have any internal resources to tap into there. There's also a really great London mug session on some GDPR updates coming at the end of this month with Inga Romanoff. Outside of that, very, very excited today to welcome Mitchell Houlbrooke from Up Education. Absolutely thrilled with what he's brought to the group for today. Really going to get the opportunity to dive in and learn a little bit about some of the lessons he's learned along the way in troubleshooting and trying to fine tune this wonderful beast of a connector that we've all tried to tame along the way. So Mitchell, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to get started. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Brooke. All right, let me just get my screen share working. Cool, I think that has worked. Right. So, all right. Before I get started, yes, I'm Mitchell Houlbrooke and I work at Up Education. I'll talk a little bit more about what that is and what my role is in a moment. But I just want to put in a couple of caveats. One is that I have been suffering from a really bad cold for the last week. So I'm feeling a lot better today, but I'm probably still only operating on about 50% of my brain cells. So if you see any temporary lapse in brain activity, blame it on that. And as we have seen from everybody's introductions, there is a fairly intimidating amount of Marketo and Dynamics expertise here. And I am definitely on the more junior side. So there's a possibility that some of the content in this presentation could be things that you already know. And if that's the case, hopefully you can at least be entertained by hearing some of the stories about how I learned those pieces of information, which is by making mistakes. I think that's probably, yeah, let's get going. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about me. I'm going to talk about my sync configuration, which is just a little bit weird, and it will give some context to some of the examples that I'm giving. And then the main content is going to be lessons that I've learned about how Marketo syncs. And hopefully, if you've made those mistakes before, you'll be entertained by hearing my recounting of them. And if you haven't, then you don't have to, because you can learn from mine. I'm also, if we're going to have time, I will talk a little bit about smart lists versus advanced find, because I think understanding the difference between these two is going to be really helpful. And then I've got a couple of slides on some of the cool possibilities and potential of the Marketo Dynamics sync. And then if we have any time at the end, we can have some questions. One other caveat is that although I've tried my best to ensure that everything in this presentation is 100% correct, there's a tiny possibility that I could say something that's actually wrong. So if you know for a fact that something I've said is wrong, please interrupt me. Otherwise, I may cause a misconception to get perpetuated. So just interrupt me if I say anything that's completely wrong. Hopefully I don't. All right, so this is me. I'm Mitchell Houlbrooke, Marketing Automation Manager at Up Education. I'm a Pākehā Kiwi, which just means I'm a New Zealander of primarily European descent. And I've just got back into the office, although I'm not in the office today because I've been sick. But we're fairly lucky here in New Zealand. We haven't got a case of COVID in the community since March, which is nice. And so most of our offices have opened back up. So that's where I've mostly been back and forth between my office and my home office. Although it's great to not have COVID, there has been some devastating side effects in that you can't buy jet skis or anything else that needs to come to us on a large ship. So devastating effects there. My background is in the private education sector. So Up Education is a company operating in the tertiary education space. And so that's where I've pretty much spent my whole career. And I've been in the marketing department that whole time. But I'm actually only a very recent convert to MOPS, to marketing operations. I started this role in April 2020, just some interesting timing, but it seemed to work out. And so I'm relatively new to Marketo. I had not used Marketo before that, but I am a long-time Dynamics user. I've been using Microsoft Dynamics since 2013. So my particular strength tends to be more in the how than the what. So I have done all sorts of marketing roles. I have directed photo shoots, I have written copy, I have designed brochures, I have planned marketing campaigns, all sorts of things. And although those are all great things, I tend to be the person who's just like, well, hold on, if we're putting in all of this effort, what is actually happening to the leads that we are generating? And most people, well, some people can be like, oh, that's someone else's job. That'll just sort itself out. I'm like, no, it won't sort itself out. I really want to understand what is happening to all this data that we're generating. So that is kind of how I fell into this role, because I care about the stuff that a lot of other people may like to gloss over. So MOPS is really, I found a home here, and I'm definitely going to be staying in this part of the marketing world for a long time. Up Education is a New Zealand-based company, and we have mostly vocational tertiary education brands. So these are preparing people for the workplace. They're giving you certifications that allow you to go out into the industry and get a job. And we also do a lot of work with universities doing university entrance. And so our education brands are mostly present in New Zealand and Australia, but we recruit students from all around the world for that. So I'm the Marketing Automation Manager. So my main job is to own Marketo and its sync with Dynamics. But I have a lot to do with all sorts of stuff around customer data, the way that it's collected, the way that it's processed, treated, and how our sales team then go and action that data. So I'm just going to quickly go over how our sync works, because it's not the out-of-the-box sync. And before I do so, I should really give a shout out to Daniel Carroll from Triggered Consulting. He is on this call, and he is the consultant that Up Education has been working with since we very first implemented Marketo. And he still works with us to this day, and he's supremely knowledgeable. So he is kind of the technical mastermind behind a lot of the stuff I'm talking about. And he'll be, I'm sure, the first person to point out any inaccuracies in this presentation. So how it works. Where's my mouse? Here we go. We've got Marketo, we've got Dynamics. And so people sync through the contacts. That is quite normal. But the big difference is that at Up Education, you don't become a lead and then convert into a contact. You actually become a lead, and a contact is created simultaneously, and the lead is related to the contact. And a lead is kind of like an opportunity in that you can have as many as you like for one contact. And the reason for that is we have all these different education brands. So we wanted the possibility of having multiple active leads across different brands who are all associated with the same contact. So because of that, we disable the sync between leads and Marketo. We just sync all new contacts because all new leads are going to create a contact anyway. So that sync works like that. The way that we generate leads is using two different methods. Everyone here is hopefully familiar with Marketo forms. If you fill out a Marketo form, you become a new person in Marketo and you'll sync across the Dynamics as a new contact. But we also have a custom form, and this form doesn't talk to Marketo. We could make it talk to Marketo, but the way that we've got it working, it doesn't need to. For this form, when you fill it out, it will actually create a brand new lead directly in Dynamics. So the lead will create a contact, the contact will sync back over to Marketo. And then we have this external app that Daniel helped us to develop, which we call the Worker app. And the Worker app helps us to sync our leads as a custom object in Marketo. So we're not using the out-of-the-box lead, we've got a custom object so that each person can potentially have many leads associated with them. And so if someone fills out a Marketo form, we will usually actually create this custom object. The Worker app will sync it over to Dynamics and vice versa. And our opportunities work as normal. So the main thing I want you to take away from this is that this kind of clouds a lot of what I'm talking about, because our Marketo Dynamics sync is really governing the relationship between people and contacts. Our Worker app is completely external to that. If our sync goes down, our Worker app is going to keep on working. It's got a completely independent relationship, which certainly makes things a little bit more interesting. Right, so I'm going to get into some of what I call my blunders and my learnings from them. And I think I've got 6 to get through, so we'll see if we get through them all. My sync has stopped working and I don't know why. I'm sure we have all been in this situation, and there's so many different reasons why this could be. And this was in my early days. As you recall, I only started this role in April 2020, and I've zero Marketo experience beforehand. So I've spent a lot of time going back and forth with Marketo support. And so I raised an issue saying, look, it looks like my sync is completely broken. What is the problem? And we did all sorts of basic checks, and we kind of ended up being stumped. The problem was still there, even after doing all of these, what we thought were like the fundamental checks you should do. Well, there was one check we didn't do. Somebody had messed with the sync user security role. So hopefully everybody understands that the way that the Marketo sync works is that there is a user called the sync user, which is set up in Dynamics. And that user has a special security profile, which is the Marketo sync user security profile. And this diagram that you can see here, this was supplied to me by Marketo support. This is an example of the exact permissions that that sync user must be set up with. And what had happened was, you'll see there's a column called delete. So the sync user security profile actually has delete permissions for a number of records. Now, I'm going to be talking about my relationship with our CRM admin a lot, because that's the most important relationship for a Marketo user where their instance is synced to Dynamics. And even though I got really good communication with my CRM admin, something that I had told them was that Marketo would never actually delete any records in Dynamics. And it doesn't. It doesn't. If you delete a person on Marketo, it will not delete that person in CRM. Our policy is that it's all good if they're not completely mirrors of each other. And so because I told them that, they're like, well, to be safe, let's just get rid of all the delete permissions. And given that it doesn't need to delete anything, it won't affect anything. Well, it turns out it does. Even though the Marketo sync user doesn't actually need to delete anything, it does need the permission to delete things. And by removing those permissions, it broke the entire sync. And when we restored those permissions, the sync resumed. So lesson number 1, don't mess with the sync user security profile, and don't mess with the sync user either, for that matter. When you implement Marketo, make sure that you're following all of the steps in the documentation and leave it alone after that. And ensure that your CRM admin understands that, because they're going to have the power to change any sync user, to change any security profiles at any time. Blunder number 2, another sync has stopped working again. So this was a later example. My sync stopped working again, and this time I knew that it wasn't the sync user security profile. I knew that it was some other issue. And it just so happened that earlier that day, there was some Microsoft outages. Now, our business uses Microsoft single sign-on, and most of our applications are Microsoft based. And so earlier we had all sorts of problems. We couldn't get into our emails, we couldn't get into lots of things, but those problems had been resolved, and IT had a checklist of things that they would go through to ensure that everything was back up and running. And they communicated out to us saying, hey, all of the Microsoft outages are now resolved. Everything should be working correctly again. And everything was working correctly except for Marketo. So what had happened? Well, the way that the sync works is that Marketo logs into Dynamics using the credentials of the sync user. And that outage had booted out the sync user from Marketo. It had logged it out. And so even though everything from Microsoft's perspective was all good, Marketo had been disconnected from Dynamics. And part of IT's process of doing all their checks, this was not one of the checks that they did. So they didn't even know that this was a thing that they had to check. And so it took me a little bit to notice. Remember that I've got this external worker app, which is syncing my custom lead objects as leads. So even when my sync goes down, that worker app is still doing its job. And that's why sometimes it takes me longer than it would normally take to notice that the sync is not working, because actually some parts of the sync are still working. So anyway, hopefully people know where to go in the Marketo admin panel to find the validate sync setup tool, which is really good, and it will just check all the different parts of your sync. And this last part here, sync user matches username and password, that was a big red cross for me. And so that's what told me that the user had been logged out. And luckily, I obtained the credentials, re-logged in, and it began working again. So lesson number 2, if there are Microsoft outages, just check and make sure that your sync user is still logged in on Marketo. Blunder number 3, why can't I troubleshoot sync issues? So if you've ever been speaking with Marketo support, one of the first things they will ask you in order to troubleshoot a problem is check your Marketo logs. And they would tell me that in a very matter-of-fact way, but there was a slight issue in that there was no such thing as Marketo logs. And I had no idea where to check them. And there's not actually a huge amount of documentation about it. And so the problem was that they were never installed correctly when our solution was set up. I had to get our IT department to recheck all of the documentation, and they were able to enable the Marketo log, what I've called table, but it's a record type, and the plug and trace logs. So these are 2 separate areas where you can check every single packet of data that goes between Marketo and Dynamics. And you need to check this in order to see whether certain sync events have happened or not. So this screenshot shows you what the trace logs look like. So plug and trace logs are I think an out of the box setting area within Dynamics. So if you click on this little gear and you click settings, you'll see that one of them is called plug and trace log. And that will list logs of all plugins that are in Dynamics. And so what I've done is I've just created a little view called Marketo trace logs, where I've just limited it to the trace logs caused by the Marketo solution. So each row represents 1 packet of data. And so there's a lot of very valuable data there. Marketo logs are a separate record type. And I really wanted to give you a screenshot to show you what they look like. But of course, they have disappeared from my Dynamics. And I've got a ticket with my CRM admin to find out where they have gone. I think it is another security permission, this time not with the sync user, but with myself. So I don't have visibility over Marketo logs anymore. So if something goes wrong with Marketo, it's not going to be very good because I'm not going to be able to check those logs. But where you would find them, if they are installed correctly, is you just look at Advanced Find. It'll pop up your Advanced Find table and you go look for, and there should be a record type called Marketo logs. Now, I'm actually not entirely certain of the difference between Marketo logs and trace logs. I don't know if they show you the exact same packets of data with slightly different columns, or whether they show you slightly different things. So I'd be really keen if anyone can jump in with a nice explanation of the difference between those 2. But the lesson learned is ensure that you can see and have full visibility of both of those.
Mitchell, sorry. Interesting that you note those, because I actually posted on the Marketo user group around this a while back. And yeah, our Dynamics guys that we were working with were looking at this and had a lot of issues and ended up on a phone with a lot of the Adobe engineers. And yeah, this was basically the problem, was they were saying, where's your user logs? And the guy was like, they don't exist.
Yeah.
And he has put a lot of information into the post that I've put onto the user group. And essentially he just said, look, the way that Adobe have built the off-the-shelf integration into Microsoft Dynamics is quite badly built. And yeah, Adobe pretty much need to rebuild it properly using all of the correct ways to use Dynamics and such. I don't know whether anyone else has heard from it. I think we've got some, as you said, very experienced people here, so I'd be interested to hear their thoughts on this.
This is Shad Khan. I'm very curious about this trace logs. I'm familiar with Marketo logs and Marketo error logs. Anytime I've had to work with support, those are the 2 pieces they've asked for. is trace logs synonymous with Marketo logs, or is it a third type of log file? Just curious if anybody knows that distinction.
My understanding is that they are distinct, but I'm not 100% sure on that. And you're correct to mention error logs. They are a separate record type that you should be able to see. That's correct. But Rob, if you're able to share that information that you posted in our chat, that would be supremely helpful to a lot of people.
Yeah, I've put it onto the chat, and essentially he says, you know, the Marketo error log and Marketo logs are entities, but
Yes.
you know, the way they've created them, it doesn't allow the views to be created, which is basically like that causes the problem that doesn't allow people to view it. And I spent a lot of time on a very boring phone call with this guy to try and understand this.
Awesome. Oh, it's very comforting to know that I'm not the only person who's run into this. All right, I'm going to.
Engineers were not very helpful at various points on this.
Yeah, it's really hard to find the correct documentation on it. It's so scant. Blunder number 4. This is a really interesting one, and I'd be fascinated to hear if anyone else has run into it. Same field, same record, different data. And this isn't a case where the sync was working perfectly. I knew that the sync was working. Yet I'm looking at the same thing on Dynamics and in Marketo, same field, same record, and I'm seeing something different. So here's the background to it. I was setting up segments for student region, and the student region is for international students, and it's determined by the region in which the agent that recruited them is based in. And then for many of our students, they don't have an agent, so we call those direct. And for the purposes of our comms, that's kind of a region in itself, direct, because it can be just generic information. And there is a field that tells me whether a student has an agent or not, and the field is just called agency. It's actually an opportunity field, but that was synced across. And so I populated my segments and noticed that they were all empty except for my direct segment. And so I looked at the data and I saw that every single opportunity had a value of agency equaling false. And I knew that wasn't the case. I know that the vast majority of our students do have an agent, and that should be true. So why is it wrong? Well, this screenshot is taken from Power Apps. Hopefully people are familiar with Power Apps. It's a really good way to get lots of metadata about all of the different entities and records that are displaying in Dynamics. And in this case, it can tell you about the properties of a particular field. So I looked at the properties of the agency field. That's its display name, that's its kind of proper name. And the data type is called yes/no, which is the equivalent of a Boolean type. Just binary, it can only have 2 results. And the items tell you what are the 2 Boolean options that you are allowed. And you can see that they're called agent or direct, which is great for CRM users because it tells you right off the bat what they are. But here is the problem. This field was not synced with Marketo. I synced it and I brought all the data across and it was all false. The problem is the fact that these items, they have got custom values. The values are not yes or no or true or false. And I think what happens is when you import all of the data over by hitting that sync, Marketo evaluates the data and it sees that the value is not true. And it assumes that the value must be false because it can only conceive of one of those 2 values when it syncs over the data. After the sync is in place, all of the data that comes through after that point is all good. It shows up with the correct value of either I think it converts agent into true and direct into false. So it correctly converts those labels into their equivalent true or false. But all of the historical data that is brought over with the initial sync all defaults to false. There was a relatively easy fix, which is that once the sync is live, you toggle the values back and forth in Dynamics and they would come through correctly. But this is kind of a very annoying, I think it's a bug, and I'm going to try and get it actioned by Adobe. But yeah, just be aware that if you've got Boolean fields and you've got customized data values, just check and make sure that they're showing up as expected in Marketo, particularly if you've recently synced that field, because that caused me a lot of problems before I figured out what the problem was. Blunder number 5, duplicates out of nowhere. I mean, this could be a whole presentation. I'm sure duplicates is a phrase a word we all hear in our nightmares. But here is one case that caused duplicates. So I have some automation set up. The person fills out a Marketo form. It's going to create that custom object and sync it across to Dynamics. And that's actually being done by our worker app. And when people fill out that form, all of a sudden I've got 2 of them in Marketo and I've got no idea why. So this particular scenario, none of you guys are going to have because it's related to our workaround, but I think the lesson that I learned from it still applies. So what happens? Hopefully everybody understands the dynamic sync cycle. So my understanding is that there is a 5-minute gap in between each sync cycle, meaning it will finish the previous sync, it will wait 5 minutes, and it will begin the sync again. And when it completes, it will wait another 5 minutes, which means you've got at least a 5-minute wait for a person created in Marketo to appear in Dynamics. And if you've got automation that triggers when a new person is created, in our case, the flow step that we've got is a custom flow step calling a webhook that is going to create this lead. And it would create the lead immediately. But here's the problem. That contact hasn't got to Dynamics yet. So Dynamics is being told that it needs to create a lead. And when Dynamics, our version of Dynamics, creates a lead, it will always create a new contact if there isn't one there already. So that's what's happening, is that we are triggering that way too early. The person doesn't exist yet. It's creating a duplicate contact over in CRM. That contact comes back through to Marketo. Meanwhile, my Marketo person, it's going through as a contact. So now I've got 2 Dynamics synced contacts, but only one of them is correct. And Marketo is not going to auto merge them because it's going to respect the fact that they are separate in Dynamics. Therefore, it will remain keeping them separate on Marketo, and you can only merge them in Dynamics. So this was all a problem related to timing. And there is a lot of people with a lot of thoughts out there about the use of wait steps and timing. And so using a wait step is how I solved this particular issue. I just waited for 10 minutes, and that ensured that this particular piece of automation would never try to create a lead too early. Now, because you're not going to have this custom flow step, there are other flow steps that will affect Dynamics. And so the lesson learned is, if you're using a flow step that has any potential of causing Dynamics to do something before your person has synced over, you either want to use a wait step in order to ensure that the sync occurs, or if you want to be proper, you would use the execute campaign. I forget what it's called. It's a new feature, and that will allow you to call a specific campaign, and Marketo will actually wait until all of those flow steps have executed. So if you want to do it properly, you would ensure that it's synced first, and then you would perform whatever action, whatever flow step is going to cause Dynamics to do something. So just be sure that you're not jumping the gun with any of your automation and causing Dynamics to want to create any new lead or contact before your one has synced over. Otherwise, you're going to be in duplicate hell. You're probably already going to be in duplicate hell from about 99 other reasons that can cause these, but this is one particular one that I learned the hard way. Final blunder I'm going to talk about. This lookup field is unreadable, so let's use a name field instead. I'm hoping that everyone's kind of run into this. So the background to this one, I had some automation. It was triggering when a new custom object comes through from Dynamics. And so you can see this is a screenshot of it here. I'm looking for this lead inquiry custom object to be created where the campus is equal to this value, or when this data value changes. And I'm looking for this text string called NZST Wellington. And the automation stopped. It just stopped working, even though I could tell that the data coming through should have been triggering it. So what happened? Well, over on Dynamics end, the campus field on my lead, it is a lookup field, and it links through to a campus record. So even though on Dynamics it says campus, and then if you look at the value, it'll say NZST Wellington. If you click on that, it'll take you through to the NZST Wellington record, which has all sorts of its own fields, including a name field. So Dynamics is being nice to you, and in the UI, it's displaying the record name. But really, the value in that field is not a name. It's not a readable text string. It's a GUID, a globally unique identifier of a whole bunch of letters and numbers that refers to that unique record. So if you sync a lookup field through to Marketo, you'll see that the value is a GUID. It's not a readable piece of data. And because I've got multiple Marketo users needing to understand what Marketo is doing, I can't use that field, because if I do, they're not going to know which campus I'm referring to. So the solution was, well, we create a name field and sync that through to the opportunity. And it just pulls the name from the campus and puts it in nice readable plain text. And that works great, except somebody changes the name and doesn't tell me, which is exactly what happened. So for a start, if you're going to work with plain text name fields that pull through the name of a lookup record, make sure that the fields actually work as intended. And this is normally accomplished using CRM workflows. It needs to set the name correctly in the first instance. It needs to do it to all historical records, and it needs to also do it anytime that value changes. But even if you set up all of that workflow correctly on Dynamics End, or your CRM admin does, you still need to know when that value changes, because your Marketo trigger is looking for a static text string. So if the name changes, you need to change the name appropriately to make it work. So yeah, name fields can be more of a curse than a blessing. This particular screenshot here is showing another smart list, and this is actually for a region. So it's showing me all of my agent counselors who are in the Russia and Central Asia region. And so this region is made up of smaller subregions. And so all of these filters here, it's this last one that tells the smart list which regions, which subregions make up this major region. And so you can see that the agency region is, there are 11 different values here. And you can see, most of them hidden, but you can see that this is good. It's not actually going to tell you, you're not going to be able to read Russia and Ukraine and other values. You're just going to see the GUID that refers to the record. So I made a judgment call for this particular smart list. Other people don't need to use a smart list, and they don't need to know which regions make up this region. Only I do. So I made the call that I would refer to the GUIDs directly rather than to a name field. And that way, it doesn't matter if they change the name of any of these regions. So long as the GUID remains the same, the smart list will still work. So it's a little bit of a judgment call. If people need to be able to read it, particularly other Marketo users, then setting up a readable name field for your lookup field might be worth it. But you need to make sure that you've got a really good relationship with your CRM admin, and that you're only using it where you absolutely have to, so that you know when those key values change and you can update your triggers and smart lists accordingly. If it's going to kind of sit there for a long time and not many Marketo users need to use it, you may be safer referring to specific GUIDs. But you're not going to know what those GUIDs refer to unless you've got some other table to be able to see. We still have time. I've got a few more gotchas, a few more interesting things that I have found out about the sync. So hopefully we're all familiar with the field type called, it's called choice in Dynamics, but it's really a drop-down field or a select field where it gives you a certain number of options, an option set, and you're only allowed to select one. Well, there is another field called choices, plural, where you've still got a drop-down list, but you can select as many as you like. And so you can see we've got one here, and it's called agency divisional interest. And it just tells me, it's actually an account field. And it tells me which of our business areas that Up Education has, which areas is each agent interested in. You can pick between one or all of them. And it's a really great field. It's really usable from a CRM user perspective. But there's one catch. When I look at my account and all the fields that are available for me to sync through, you would expect it to appear right here. I've got it sorted alphabetically, and it doesn't appear. And that's because Marketo will not sync through the choices field type. It's completely useless to Marketo because it has no way of rendering those options. It's quite a fancy field type. So my workaround for this particular one is I've requested a field which actually converts the result of these choices into plain text, and it's just going to dump it into a field for me. My problem is I don't know what order those results are going to be in. I don't know if it's going to be consistent. So just be aware, if you are using these choices fields in Dynamics, you may have to figure out a workaround. Yep, and Rob has mentioned that he's got that same issue. Hopefully everybody is also aware of the fact that the Marketo solution has a version number and it occasionally gets updated. And if your version is out of date, well, any support that you're getting from Marketo may not be valid if your solution is not up to date. Really easy to check. If you just go into your Dynamics admin panel, into your Marketo admin panel, click on the Dynamics link, and there's a little button up here saying download Marketo solution. It'll pop up with this window, select the version of Dynamics that you're using, and the file doesn't actually make it obvious what version you've just downloaded. But if you inspect the XML file that it downloads, you'll see that there's a version number tag. And just check in Dynamics that that version number is the latest one. It's quite easy to find your version number in Dynamics, your installed solution. Go to settings, use the gear up the top right, and you'll see that there's an area for solutions. And then you need to find a solution that's called Marketo Lead Management, and you'll see the version number here. So I'm pretty sure 4.2.0.0 is the latest version. If that version is not up to date, well, you're probably going to have a lot more problems. Another one, make sure that you have a strategy for ensuring that your owners are owned by real people. Now, for most of you guys who have leads come in that later convert to contacts, you'll have Dynamics workflows that ensure that the lead or the contact is owned by someone in sales or a real human being. But for us, we've got this problem where we don't care who the contact is owned by, we only care who the lead is owned by. And when you fill out that custom form, your owner is going to default to the person who created you. And that person is node user, which means if I were to merge in these details into an email and not check them, it will say, please reply to me if there's anything we can do. Your faithful servant, node user, which is not particularly great. And if I created a task and assigned it to the sales owner, well, it's going to assign it to node user, and node user does not have great performance record of converting leads. So hopefully everybody has already got the system completely down pat in Dynamics, but just make doubly sure that every person in Marketo has a real human owner that you can rely on. The other thing you should really watch out for is the job title. I don't know about you, but some of our job titles in the system, they're synced over from our HR system, and they are absurdly long and sometimes like confusing or inappropriate for customers or outwards facing people to see. So it's actually quite easy to override the job title if your workplace policy allows it to a more customer-friendly job title. So just make sure that whatever is in this job title field is actually going to be readable by a human being if you ever merge this in to any email content or anything like that. Finally, one final gotcha. You can't reference the same field more than once on a custom object, and it's really annoying. So I have this use case where I want to pull a smart list of people who have an opportunity, which for us is an enrollment in a course, an opportunity which has a start date, an intake start date, between 2 and 3 weeks in the future. Well, there is a between operator. So I've pulled through this has opportunity filter, and I've got an intake start date field. This is the field that I care about. And there is a between operator, but the between forces you to select actual dates. And of course, that's only going to be correct today. I need this to be correct. It's going to trigger, it's a smart list that's going to trigger a campaign going forward. So I need it to be between 2 and 3 weeks always. But there is no such thing as between 2 and 3 weeks. I can only tick this field and take start date, select an operator once, and I can't select it again. So this is my workaround, but you will see where this could fall over. So I've got my first one, it says intake start date must be in future 3 weeks. So it must be sometime in the next 3 weeks. Well, then I've dragged in a whole nother filter, and I've got all of the same parameters on it. And then I've referenced intake start date again, and it's saying it must be in the future after 2 weeks. And then I've got an all. So you must meet both of these conditions. This is great, and it works most of the time. But here's the thing. The opportunity that meets these conditions and the opportunity that meets these conditions does not have to be the same. So if you, for some reason, have 2 opportunities, one that meets this condition and a second one that meets this condition, well, then you'll be included in the smart list, even though that's not the intention. Now, I've made the judgment call that this is fine for us. Like 99.9% of our students will never have 2 opportunities that independently meet each of these conditions. But for you, when you are trying to do a reference like this, this is just a feature that doesn't exist. And I don't know if it's going to come on board anytime soon, but you can't reference the same field on a custom object twice. And so this workaround is very risky. We are getting very close to run out of time, so I'm probably not going to get to my very last section, but I think I do have some time just to talk about smart lists versus advanced find. And my advice to you is get as good as you possibly can at both. So I love working with smart lists. It was kind of a revelation to me when I started working with Marketo to see how easy and intuitive smart lists were. And smart lists are fantastic for finding who you want, but they're not necessarily fantastic at finding what you want. And so that's a distinction I'll talk about in a moment. But what smart lists are amazing at, and much better than advanced find being the Dynamics equivalent, is you can do all values on a single field. So if I put email address is, well, you can see I've got 3, and if the person has any of these 3 email addresses, the person will be included. Doing this on advanced find is really hard because you can't put an or on a single field. You've got to go drag on an email address and say email address is this. Then you've got to drag in a second email address filter and go is that. And then you've got to combine them as an or. And you've got to do that every single time. So with 3, well, that's not too bad. But what if you want to do 1,000? It's completely impossible and unworkable. But on Marketo Smart Lists, it's really easy to do those 4 values. You can also do lists within lists, and this is a bit of a Pandora's box. You can achieve a lot of efficiency by referring to smart lists within your smart lists, but just be aware that the more layers deep you go, the slower it will make Marketo, particularly if you've got a triggered campaign that is time sensitive, and the more pain it will give you when the less transparent it will be as to who is in your smart list, because you've got to dig through like 10 layers of smart lists. If you're the only person you're using your Marketo instance and you're a master of all your smart lists, then by all means create an unholy pyramid of smart lists. But for me, I try and limit it to no more than 2 to 3 deep. But that can be super powerful in getting the exact list of people that you want. You've also got these natural language time filters, which you don't have in Advanced Find. You've also got consistent field labels. In Dynamics, fields are a real pain. The label that you see on the user interface is different to the label that you will see in Advanced Find, and it's different again to the label you will see in the back end. So every field can have 2 or 3 or more names depending on the context, and that can drive people crazy, particularly when we've got a bunch of very similarly named fields. In Marketo, field names are much more consistent. So whatever they look like in one place, if you drag them over here, they'll look like the same field, which is great. It's also auto-saving all of your changes on Dynamics. This doesn't happen, you have to manually save it. And of course, you've got this enormously powerful activity search where you can just filter by any activity that has or has not happened. Whereas doing that in Dynamics is really hard unless you've set that activity up as its own record type. However, Dynamics Advanced Find, and hopefully people are very familiar with this particular window, its killer app is that it can cross-reference between tables. And so you can refer to, in this case, I'm looking for accounts where the account has a lead, where the lead has a provider, where the provider has a user, or an intake. And all of those have their own parameters. So you can get kind of ridiculously deep at going across different record types. Now, I had a slide later on that I'm not going to have time to get to, but you actually can go multiple records deep, but it involves setting up custom objects as child custom objects of other custom objects. And I've only ever heard rumors of it. I've never seen it in action, but apparently if you're really, really crazy, you can set this up in Marketo. But of course, you can also reference non-person tables. So you can get a list of accounts, you can get a list of whatever you want, so long as it exists as a record type. You actually can get whatever you want out of Marketo, but you can't use Smart Lists to do it. You need to use the bulk extract API, and it's just going to spit out everything, and you have to use some other platform to filter what you want. Natalie says, my favorite thing about Advanced Finds is pulling in columns from related entities all in one view. Yes, that is a beautiful thing to be able to just select whatever columns from whatever related entities and get it all in one view. Although you're not allowed to filter or sort by it until you export, which is really annoying for some reason. The Marketo UI won't let you sort by alphabetical order a field that is pulled in from a related entity. A really good exercise that I suggest you do, particularly if you're new to Marketo and Dynamics, is pull a smart list and pull an advanced find that are the equivalent and see if you get the same number of people. And if you don't, sorry, I'm just going to close this curtain. If you don't, try and figure out why. And there could be some legitimate reasons why. But ideally, you want to get the same number and make sure that you're looking for like versus like. So I've got 2 different examples here. I've got an advanced find where I'm looking for a contact record, which is the equivalent of my Marketo person, where the status is active and they have an opportunity with these values. And so then I've set up the rough equivalent as a Marketo Smart List. And I'm just going to check that I've got the same person, the same number of people. If I don't, I'm going to be looking to see what those differences are. And it could be that we've deliberately unsynced certain records, and that's all good. We would expect that to be different. But if those lists are wildly different, it means something about our data structure is not adding up. So in your first kind of 12 months of a Marketo Dynamics sync, on a regular basis, you should do these list comparisons, and it will really help you. Look, I've got another few slides, but I would estimate that's like another 10 minutes worth of content. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to send these slides around afterwards so you can see what those are. But because we're reaching the end of our time, I think I'm just going to skip right to the very end and say thank you so much for listening. Hopefully some of what I said was interesting and useful and there weren't any glaring errors. Yeah, thank you very, very much. I think that is it from me. Please let me know if you've got any questions.
Thanks. I've got a question if no one minds.
Go for it.
I've heard a lot of stuff about kind of duplicate leads and contacts and duplication and things not working properly. And, you know, I guess this for Mitchell and for anyone else, Natalie, you know, people like you as well, you know, do people feel that, you know, you can use Adobe Marketo out of the box with Dynamics out of the box, and, you know, you're going to have a functioning CRM marketing automation integration? Or do people feel like, you know, you do need to go off and buy extra systems and services to do extra bits of integration or, you know, deduplication because, you know, it breaks essentially?
It really depends on how complicated your Dynamics is. If you've got an out-of-the-box Dynamics, an out-of-the-box integration will be fine. If you have messed with your Dynamics and turned it into this unholy conglomeration of custom things, that's when you're going to need the extras. And that's certainly the position that we've found ourselves in.
We were actually, Brooke and I were talking about potentially having a session about that specifically, because Dynamics out of the box, you know, isn't like Salesforce in the sense where it's meant, Dynamics looks at leads as interest, not people. That's how Dynamics and Microsoft explain it, where on the Salesforce side, it's more, they look at it as leads and contacts. So it really depends on how you're using the system, if you're using Dynamics as it's intended to, with using those leads as interest and using contacts more as people, as to how you set up your system. So we've talked about having a session specifically about that because that's a common question people have.
That'll be hugely valuable.
Okay.
Yeah, I
make
would
that the
agree.
next session.
The number of our salespeople who've struggled when I've tried to explain that, you know, yeah, at this point you need to look at this record, but another point you need to look somewhere else, and they don't seem to get it. So that'd be super.
I've done a lot of visuals to try to explain the different models and how they work and how the different models work with Marketo. So it's definitely something we can cover in future mugs.
Awesome. There's been a bunch of comments, and I will just quickly call out that Natalie, you posted a comment earlier that I didn't mention, talking about the trace logs. So that's really, really helpful that you've kind of clarified specifically what the difference is between those. So make sure you check the chat logs to see that explanation.
Thank you.
And for anyone that's joining on the recording, I will be copying out and downloading the chat log, and we'll also include the link that was added there so that we have that information available as well.
Yeah, I think there's also some interesting stuff coming down the pipeline with the LinkedIn integrations. Because again, you know, if anyone uses LinkedIn Sales Navigator, the enterprise version is starting to have functionality that starts to identify if people have left companies and such, which, you know, if you're emailing large numbers of people and you don't have some sort of system pulling out who is, you know, hard bouncing or has left a company, that can be quite an interesting one. Unfortunately, LinkedIn are not very proactive with kind of understanding how their products work sometimes. Though.
Well, that's all the content that I had. A number of people already had to jump off. So thank you so much to everyone. It was my first presentation, but it looked like people appreciated it. So that's really fantastic. And thanks so much for everyone's really in-depth questions. I can still see that there's I'm only at the beginning of learning all of the intricacies that come with this sync.
Mitchell, thank you so much for joining us today. We really, really appreciate this, and everyone else who jumped on and, you know, asked questions and was able to help contribute to the conversation. We appreciate all of you being here. We look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you shortly. Bye-bye.
All right, thanks.